Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Hope Ropes, where we share stories of hope, healing, and transformation. I invite you to just get comfortable and listen with an open heart, an open mind. Grab onto the hope ropes in this episode and borrow belief from those who have gone before you. Today, I'm really excited because I have someone who is near and dear to my heart. Welcome, Shenikka.
Thank you for having me. And I feel the same way about you. You're just so special to me. And I know we'll talk about our relationship and how it's developed through the years, but I'm so excited to be here. And when you asked me to be on your podcast, I'm like, of course, it's like a no-brainer. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. So for those of you who don't know Shenikka yet, Shenikka is a licensed holistic psychotherapist and a transformational coach who operates within a trauma-informed, which is very important, culturally conscious and anti-oppressive framework. In addition to her close to 20 years of experience working with clients, her own personal journey with trauma, chronic illness, has been her most valuable. And it has really changed the way that you work, right?
Yeah.
Guiding you, to move towards more nervous system regulation, somatic work, inner child modalities. So I love that your practice is so holistic and comprehensive too, And many of you will also know Shenikka from Instagram. Um, at the Healing Vibe. Her posts are filled with laughs, right? Filled with life, authenticity, realness, and empowerment. She also has her own podcast, the Healing Vibe podcast, and she recently authored a workbook called Let's Connect 15, a 15-week somatic guided workbook for couples who really want to deepen their intimacy and connection. And I have it. I'm in week one. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later, just about how, this really does play into this journey of how our relationships can struggle, be challenged as we're healing. So we'll get more into that. But enough from me. I want you all to just hear this incredible hope rope, the story that Shenikka has, which I have had the pleasure and honor of kind of seeing you at your worst and
Mhm.
watching you completely transform into the presence I see before me today. So maybe bring us back and tell us a little bit about how life was maybe before you became chronically ill. And yeah, bring us through your journey of chronic illness.
Yeah. Ooh, as you're talking about talking about me, like I literally can feel like I literally am feeling so much emotions right now, even within my body, because I know that you were there in the beginning. But before I became ill, I practiced as a therapist and I was a new mom. I have a 6-year old now. So probably about a year before getting sick, I had her. But life was, it seemed good. I was married and I had friends and I was, running a group practice. I was literally running. So being a new mom, running a group practice, seeing clients on my own, all of that, I was like trying to like do it all. And I wanted to have that American dream, right? Of like having the business and like my identity was so connected to like what I was doing and it was just like a rat race. And at the time I didn't recognize what it was doing to me or my body, but um I crashed.
Mm.
And it's interesting when you're in it, you just think that that's the way that life is supposed to be. You don't really realize that all of these patterns are impacting us in our bodies. But life was fine. I mean, I was doing the things. I feel like I wasn't very connected to myself. Like I thought that I was. And even like as a therapist that had been seeing clients for several years, I don't think that I really took the time to do like my own inner work. Like here and there, I've been in therapy and, all this stuff, but I wasn't I wasn't walking the talk, right? So I was here sitting with other people in their own stuff, but I think inward, I was a mess, right? I had developed all these patterns. I had my own history of trauma. I come from a family where my father was an alcoholic, narcissistic, abusive to my mom, witnessed that throughout most of my life. And I didn't really address it. Like, I grew up in the Caribbean. And so, I would say that not as a diss to Caribbean people, but that kind of is the norm where like men tend to be like abusive and, women tend to be like, men are usually domineering, the women are usually very passive. And I just witnessed a lot of that stuff. And even though I wholeheartedly was like, I never want to be with anybody like that. I never want to like be like my mom. Like I love her, but I never want to be like that. I entered in relationships that were with emotionally unavailable men most of my life. And
Interesting.
so, like, and I had an awareness of it, but it wasn't like I really worked on it in a significant way. So there was all of these things, right? So growing up in trauma, then like having my daughter, then being so busy, having no boundaries. Like I would like see clients, like I was like at an airport calling a client, right? Like, hey, like I'm at an airport about to go to Europe, but like, let me talk you through this crisis, right? So I just didn't have a lot of boundaries. And then the perfect storm happened. And that was in 2000, I think around 2018. And that's when like I started to get these little like hints, like something's not right. Like I felt like I was starting to become more fatigued.
Mm.
Like I was noticing that I was more anxious. Like my body was trying to speak to me and it was trying to tell me, Shenikka, like it was whispering, Shenikka, like,
Yeah.
I need you to listen to me. And it didn't listen. And I just kept going and going. And then by the end of 2018, I literally crashed. So I was pushing myself, like, even though I was like having all of these like symptoms, I was still like seeing clients. And so one day I was in my office and I was actually with a client. And literally, like the room started spinning. I'm like, oh my God, what's happening? And I'm like, I have to pause this session. Went into the bathroom. I'm like, what is going on? Like, I just don't feel right. I came back and then I'm like, okay, I drank some water, still wasn't feeling right. And then I had to like end that session, which, I was like so it was embarrassing and it was
Oh.
also like so upsetting for a client to witness that. And after that, I started having like even more of these like symptoms that were very weird. Like I didn't know what was going on. Like my sleep was being impacted. I was getting like a couple hours of sleep a night. I would wake up like at 3 or 4 in the morning, like every night. And it was like clockwork and I couldn't go back to sleep. I would have dizzy spells. And I don't want to talk too much about symptoms. I don't know how much.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I feel like as much as you want to share, because this paints the
Okay.
picture too, right?
Yeah. I was having dizzy spells. I would have these moments where I'd feel like I was gonna pass out. I started like reacting to foods, like it was so odd. Like I'm like, why am I feeling weird after I eat this food? It was just like so much stuff, and it was scary because I didn't know what was going on. And so then I started like going to the doctors. And as you know, it is a very interesting experience going to doctors that don't know what's happening. And so, I was dismissed a lot, or some doctors were like, it's just anxiety, right? And I'm like, okay, yes, I am anxious because I don't know what's happening to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is what is creating my
Yeah.
anxiety. And, I would go from like doctor to doctor and I just felt so dismissed. Like it was just so, so hurtful because these doctors would just dismiss these symptoms. And I think it's because they just didn't know what was happening. And so the crazy thing is like telling people when you don't know what's happening, I wish that these doctors would at least investigate more or not dismiss, right?
Yeah.
Instead of like, and so then you internalize that and you're like, well, maybe something is wrong with me. Like
Yeah.
maybe this is all in my head. But I knew it wasn't in my head. I'm like, this is real. Like these symptoms are so real and it's like so scary. And so then um eventually I got to the point where like I couldn't eat like anything. I was eating like rice and like maybe a meat like rice and chicken every day.
Yeah.
I became like I was so weak, literally no energy, felt like picking up like food was
Yes. Yeah.
like it was so exhausted. Like it was just so horrible. And, being a new mom, it was just so hard because like I had this like little baby, right, that I wanted to be there for and could not take care of. And you know, over the course of like trying to figure out what was going on, I decided that I wanted to connect with maybe like a naturopathic doctor.
Okay.
And so I reached out to a few, and then one in particular, I reached out to her and she was helpful to a certain degree. Like she shared that she had her own journey with chronic illness, and she wanted to help others who were going through the same thing. And so I finally connected with her and we talked and stuff. And in that first conversation, it was kind of helpful because she helped to normalize some of what I was experiencing.
Okay, good.
And so we talked about, and from the naturopathic perspective, right, there were some things that she discovered, like we talked about, like parasites and
Yes, yes.
later discovered that like I was living in a moldy house and that there could have been Lyme and all these things that we all know
Yes.
about in
Yep.
this
All the,
community,
yep.
all the things. And so I think initially I felt a sense of like relief, like, okay, like it's not all in my head, that what I'm experiencing is real and there's other people like me out there. And then we started talking about like, supplements and all the things. But what came out of that relationship is that she was like, there's this program called DNRS, and
Ah, okay.
I have worked with people who have been in this program and they speak really highly of it. And I think that this is going to be really helpful for you because she told me a little bit about like nervous system that like, the program helps you to like rewire, and like when your nervous system is more regulated, you can like tolerate stuff. Like she gave me like the basics. And
Mhm.
me as like a therapist, unfortunately, like we are not really taught these things. And
Yeah.
so like it didn't even like occur to me that that was a thing, right? And so I looked into DNRS and bought the program. And at the time it was hard because I had limited capacity. And so as you know, like you're trying to like learn the program when you're like barely can keep your
Yeah.
eyes open, right? And so I'm like, I'm going to take my time and I'm going to learn it. And, basically it's a rewiring program where you learn how to do these practices that help to rewire your brain because as we know that we actually have agency over our physiology. And so when we can, if you think about it as when we can create the environment for our bodies to thrive, then a lot of our symptoms can be resolved or
Yeah.
reversed or decreased. So I'll pause there. I don't know if
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
you
So
have-
that's no, you did such a great job, this little recap. And I want to point out something specifically too for those watching that it's never just one thing, right? We know
Mhm.
it's so multi-layered and that, there's a history of trauma and coping mechanisms and stress and even good things in life too, right? Being a new mom and adjusting to something differently and trying to incorporate, you know, this other thing into your life, right? We're never like substituting, we're just adding to the load, right?
Mhm.
Instead of like, oh, I'm gonna like slow down here and just make more room for that because we don't know. We don't know
Right.
any better. And you said, exactly what I felt as well, as my body was whispering for a very long time. And then it just started screaming. And it's like
Mhm.
you just cannot ignore it at that point. And then you bring up, another point of when we go to all of these doctors, and I can't tell you how many times I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression as well. And I'm like, well, the reason I'm anxious and depressed is because I feel this way.
Yes.
Like it didn't come to, so it's like a whole thing, but so way too much gaslighting and
Hmm.
dismissing, and it's just really sad. But so much has changed since we started rewiring, right?
Yes.
So that makes me really excited, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But I want to hear more about your actual journey of, brain rewiring, because I think we connected around that time as well.
Yes. Yeah. So once I started DNRS, I decided that I wanted to like get rid of my social media. So like it was just too triggering to be connected to like the real world because like I didn't want to see what everybody else was doing. It was just too
Mm.
painful. And so like and I really didn't have the capacity. And then I think that was almost around like right before COVID started anyway. But I remember I was like, I'm gonna create an Instagram page where I can find people who are also healing from chronic illness. And so I created this page that was specifically, I'm going to follow people that are doing this brain rewiring because I need that inspiration and motivation. And as God would have it, you were one of those first people that I saw. Like, I don't know, like I think I was like scrolling and then I came up and at the time your page was like hope. It wasn't what it is now. It was
Was it the Grateful V?
the Grateful V, yeah.
Yeah, it was the
And it
Grateful
was
V.
like, and I remember like scrolling and then you were sharing your journey.
Yeah.
And I don't know, at the time I don't think you were coaching yet.
No,
You were still actually, I think, doing
doing
your own.
DNRS.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was still in it. Yeah.
And and that was like one of the first times that I saw like you shared your story. And I remember like looking and I was like, oh my God, like I feel like this is hope. Like she's giving me hope. And I was just like going through all of your like posts and like scrolling. And then remember showing it to like my husband. I was like she had a lot of the similar stuff. And I was like, oh my God, like she gets it. And I think I may have reached out to you. And you were so kind and you were just so compassionate. And I'm like, you're a stranger. You don't know me from anybody, but you were just so, so sweet and so kind. And from then I would like reach out to you and like, like I'm just struggling. I can't do this. Life is too hard. Like I'm never going to get all the things, right? All those beliefs that were not true. But at the time, I just felt so hopeless and I needed so much hope and you provided that for me. And it just, like when I think about it, like it makes me want to cry because
There-
just to have that support from a stranger. And that's one of the things that I really value about even this community is that, like when you get to this low place, you know what that's like. And so like you develop this like compassion and empathy for people because you know how hard it is. And when other people don't really like, you don't know, no one, unless you've been on this journey, you
yeah.
don't know
You
what
don't
it's
know.
like. You
Yeah.
don't know. Like you
Yeah.
think you know, but you don't know. And so
Yes.
I appreciated that. And then our journey just like, like I would reach out and at the time I'm like, you were like my go-to person. And then I remember when you started accepting clients, you were like accepting a few clients and I was so excited and I reached out and I'm like, yep, I would love for you to work with me. And at that time, my family had all moved to Connecticut because we needed the additional support because we just couldn't do it by ourselves. We live in DC where we don't have family. And so, you and I started meeting, and at that time I mean, if you remember, I was like
Oh, I
so
remember.
hopeless. I was so sad. I was so
Yes,
sad.
yes. I remember, and I have some pretty, vivid memories of that time because, well, first of all, when you would reach out to me on Instagram, my my heart just listening to some of the voice messages you sent me, and I'm like, no, I can't let her give up. Like, I can't. I'm gonna hope for her. And I get chills just remembering
I
it because
know.
I'm like, it's as if I could see what was coming. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I just want her to see that, but she can't see it yet, but I'm going to hold it for her. And it was just like, my goal was like, if she can just hold on a little bit longer. And like, that was literally my intention, was just get her to not give up, just to hold on a little bit longer. Like I was a little further along than you. And so I
Mm-hmm.
could see it. And I remember having some calls with you, and like, there are times where, you could barely talk,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a challenge. And you I remember you telling me you couldn't even make your own breakfast, or you couldn't care for your daughter Zoe, right? And I just remember, like, I know what that's like. And I'm like, my heart broke watching you. But while at the same time I was grieving what you're going through, I was like, no, but there's hope. But I
Yeah.
know this works. And oh, I'm so just, I mean, you
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah, I know. And I forgot about some of that stuff too, which is so interesting. But yeah, that all of it, right? It couldn't do all of that. And what I appreciated about our work together is that like you were so good at like with DNRS, which great program, right? Love it. I think a missing element was the emotional piece. And what I loved about when we worked together is that you integrated that into the work. So like we did a lot of tapping. And one of the things that came out was I had lost my best friend right before. Like that's another piece of my perfect storm, right? The grief of losing my childhood best friend. And I remember like we spent some time, some of our sessions, we talked about the grief, and you helped me to like process some of that through tapping and visualization. And so that was also important because I think that with brain retraining, we're told, just like be positive, focus on just, positive, positive, positive. And while that's great and all, like we can't dismiss that there's also all these other emotions and grief that
Yeah.
actually is what is also feeding some of these symptoms. And so that was like super helpful for me. And then, like little by little, I would, start to see little shifts. And I remember there was like one memory I remember all the time is that you would tell me, like, encourage me. I remember I'd be like, oh, my family one, my husband and my daughter, like they're going to the park or they're going somewhere. And I'm like, I want to go, but I'm like, I can't, like, I just don't feel like I could do it. And then you'd be like, just like trust yourself, even if you go and you sit in the car, like you don't like just give yourself that like permission to like go do a round or do a practice before, sit in the car. You don't have to like walk around, but at least like that's giving your brain evidence
Yeah.
that you can take a step forward. And those types of things were really helpful because it was just so scary and so hard. And sometimes like I would be there. Like I remember one time I went and I felt horrible. And I think I messaged you and it was like, okay, that's okay. But you went and
Yeah.
that's okay and can celebrate that, right? And so like those assurances of you can still like look at those little wins, right? Even if you did something and you crashed, or even if you did something and you didn't feel your best, that's still okay.
Yes.
That's still giving your brain and your nervous system this message that like I'm gonna show up and that I can do this. And so all of those things were just like so helpful for me.
I love that you just kept showing up though, right? Like that's the key in all of this, is
Mhm.
is choosing to show up in some way. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? We know
Yeah.
that. And that's what I saw with you. And I know that you also did primal trust as well, right?
Yeah,
And
I did.
so, yeah, so maybe tell us a little bit more about like your
Yeah,
journey.
I did. Yeah, primal trust was also like a big piece of my journey. I felt like I don't remember how I was introduced to it, but I learned about it and then I joined. And Primal Trust, I feel like, was a great program because it integrated a combination of the brain rewiring and the somatic piece.
Yeah.
And also, there's levels. So, level one was more about, at the time, actually, when I joined, there wasn't a level one. But level one is more about, regulating the nervous system. Level two is like the deeper work. So when I joined, I think at the time there was calm, which was some of that brain retraining, brain rewiring stuff. But level two was more of like that deeper inner work. And
Mm,
so initially, like I was not, I don't think I was quite ready for it. And so, but I did it and it triggered me.
mm,
But in the end, it was the best thing that I could do. So once I, started doing the deeper work and there were things that were coming out and things that needed to come out. And I feel like our triggers, they tell us a lot.
yeah.
And so, learning about triggers and learning about like my own triggers through that, it helped me to understand myself and my patterns even more. And so we learned a lot about developing what Dr. Kat calls the adult main personality. This is like, or this like the equivalent of the self in IFS. And this is like this person, this like grounded, connected adult part of ourselves that can hold space for these other aspects of ourselves. And really, that helped me to learn how to build this like more self-assured, grounded part of myself.
Mm,
And it was just like so transformational because I was able to get to a lot of the deeper work through that journey. And then Regulate came out, and then I went through that program, the nervous system regulation program, where we learned a lot about somatics and all these practices that really help us to get more connected to our nervous system. And that was like, I think, a missing piece. Like
mm.
that was what I believe also was missing with DNRS is the somatics, because as we
I
know,
agree.
our bodies,
Big
yeah,
time.
right?
Yeah.
Our bodies hold so much of our stories. And when we can get more connected to the physical sensations and learn how to attune, it really makes a difference. And so that was like really transformational. And then I also ended up teaching in the level two program.
Right.
And my specific class was on living our values, which was interesting, right? Because I felt like when I did that program, I started to understand like what my values are and how can I live based on my values, right? Because when we're stuck in trauma or we're stuck in chronic illness, our identity becomes very much connected
Yeah.
to our symptoms and our trauma. And so when we can allow ourselves to see that and start to identify with like, what is it that I value and how can I live in spite of what I might be experiencing? So even though I might not feel 100%, if I were to live with my values in mind, what choice would I make? And so that really helped me a lot. So, there were times when there were certain events for like our family, and I didn't always feel that great, but I was like, I'm valuing family, I'm valuing connection. So I'm gonna go, right? Because I'm not going to limit myself to
Yes.
just what I'm feeling. But if I live and if I choose from my values, then I am showing my nervous system that my value actually is more important, or it plays a more important role than my fears. And so that was really helpful for me. And so I taught a class based on that. And that really kind of helped my own, like, I feel like that actually like propelled my healing in many ways because it allowed me to have more purpose And purpose for me
Yes.
felt like it gave me something. It gave me ownership of something. It gave me something to look forward to. And that really, I think, helped my body. And it's weird. Like I don't know how it happens, but it's like literally when you have more purpose, something happens, something shifts. It's like
I
your body
agree.
meets the purpose. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you have purpose now. I want to make energy for you so that you
Yes.
live the purpose, right?
Yeah, I get excited hearing that because I've heard that so much through the people that I've worked with. Like
Mhm.
they've noticed such a profound like leap in their healing or transformation when they started to do, like you said, live according to their
Yeah.
values, but also doing something that made them feel like they were contributing in some way
Yeah.
or making a difference. And it's funny, and I don't know if you remember this, but I didn't even know that you were a therapist for like the first few, I don't know, a
Yeah.
while of working together. You no idea. And you didn't mention it at first, and then when you finally mentioned it, I was like, oh, okay. And then you're saying, but I don't ever want to do that again. Like you were just like, there's no way. And yeah, and that is a perfect example of when we are making a decision based on the state of our nervous systems, right? From
Yeah.
not from our values, but from our past, from our trauma, from our pain.
Mhm.
And yet you still loved it. I remember doing a visualization with you like early on, and you were like, oh yeah, I like you lit up. You lit
Mhm.
up, and I'm like, oh, this is life-giving to her, but we're not going to force it, like
Yeah.
you'll get there. And it's like, look what you're doing
I
now.
know.
It's
I know. And you
wild.
used to say that. You were like, you used to say, I see you. Like you would speak life into me. Like you'd be like, I see you like doing this work. I see you giving. Like you saw it, but it was so hard for me to see it. But I remember
Yeah.
you always saying that, like, I see it. And I really didn't, I think that I got so scared of going back to
Yeah.
being a therapist. And I was just like, I don't ever want to. I don't like first, I don't think I'm gonna have the capacity to hold space for people again. And I don't know if like my body will like I was just scared and I didn't want to
Yeah.
go back to that. And and I think just the way in which I practiced before, I talked about the boundaries or the lack of boundaries that I had. And all of those things, I was just like, nah, I don't want to do it again. And it literally was I had started to, and another thing I'll mention before that is that with purpose, like I created my social media. That was also a way of me feeling purpose because I would start to share little things.
Yeah.
And it was like that was my little daily dose of like
Yeah.
sharing an aspect of something for people to learn and even though like social media has its, toxicity, it was still a place for me to share and it did bring me some joy,
Yeah.
and those little joys really they matter.
Yeah.
And then like I within the Primal Trust community I was also doing some other work, and so once I did the teaching and I was like, okay, I could do this, and I kind of surprised myself, and then I was doing some other stuff, and then it was like one day I just was just sitting and I'm like, I don't know. I miss the intimacy of relationship with clients. Like I was like missing it. And I felt like this is weird. Like I didn't think I wanted to do this. And I remember just like pondering about it and thinking like, hmm. And then I was like, and then, it's funny how God works. And then like an old client reached out
Look at that.
and was like, hey, and I've had like periodically old clients reach out and I'm like, unfortunately, I'm not back and this particular client who like I'd worked with for several years and we had to stop working because of me getting sick, and she was like, I'm just checking in again just to see if you're accepting clients. And then I'm like, I think I'm gonna work with her. I think I'm ready. And so I was like, maybe I'm gonna like take on one or two clients. And so I remember the first session that I had with her, and I was just like I was so excited. Like it felt like I never did. it felt like I never did this before. Like I knew how to be a therapist, but it felt so new. And I remember coming in because I had learned so much. I had learned
Mm,
so much about the nervous system and somatics and mind body. And I felt like all of this new knowledge, like I want to be able to share this with others. And I want to practice therapy very differently. And it felt so good after that session. I remember thinking, oh, like it was so fulfilling. And that's when I knew that I really wanted to do this. And it was so I just
like you light up right now talking about it,
yeah,
right?
I was so
So
happy.
I mean, clearly you're living your values and your purpose too. So it just, like we said, that life, it breathes life into us as well, right? And again, you never, we don't rush it. It happens when it's supposed to happen. And so bring us to today. Like, I know
Mhm.
that you're doing your one-on-one clients, but you've
Yeah.
got so much more.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just really grateful for where I am today, right? And I always am very honest by saying that I am not recovered, but and not and I don't I'm not looking for necessarily recovery. I'm looking for I've been transformed.
Mm, I like
That is what feels like my truth. I still have symptoms, I still have limitations, but I'm definitely not where I was, both physically and emotionally and mentally, and that's the beauty of this journey is that it once felt like I wanted resolution of my symptoms, but the what happened is that actually I transformed in ways that I could not even have imagined. And that is what I'm just like, who would have thunk it? Like I would never have asked for this to happen, but the ways in which that I've transformed has been amazing, right? So I think that I would say that my biggest shift has been in how I feel about myself, right? Like I think that in before all of this, like I think I was walking, I didn't know myself really. I feel like um I was just like talking, what is it? Not talk the walk the talk, talk the walk, whatever
yeah.
where you're just like I knew, I had it all in here, right? And I don't feel like I was very connected to my body. And so through this process of learning how to connect with my body and, to go through something so hard and to like literally bring yourself from the depths of the low of the lowest, like I don't know anybody that would not transform
Yeah,
through this process, right? You've
exactly.
transformed. I know that. I've seen so many of us that have transformed. And I think the biggest gift for me is that I just really learn how to like step into my own self and my authentic voice, right? So, I haven't arrived, but I definitely feel like I know who I am. I feel like I want to show up as unapologetically me as possible. I no longer feel like I need other people's permission or like approval, or I'm not looking for people to like me. Like it's great to be liked, but if you don't like me, that's okay, right? And I just feel like a sense of like it feels like a big shift in it just like energetically it feels differently. And on top of that, I would say even how I engage. I know we haven't really talked about like my relationship, but
Yeah.
um I think that there's been so much growth because of my growth. I think it has positively, and my husband, impacted the relationship. I parent very different than I would have if had I not gone through this, right? So being a mom is not easy, and learning how to regulate and learn how to be more in your body and all the things, it helps us to parent very differently. And so I think that now I have a lot more understanding of um what it means to be more of a relational mother,
Mhm.
and even shifting a lot of the intergenerational trauma, right? Like I was raised where we were spanked, or I was raised with all these beliefs that I don't believe that that's the way that I need to parent. So there's just been so much that I've learned through this journey that I think has helped me in my connections, the friendships that I've made, the people that I've connected with. And it's just like amazing to like continue to learn and continue to grow. And I love, working with clients. I now have like a practice where I see, I primarily work with women and couples. I am very conscious of how much or how many clients I have now and really work. I know you and I talk about that a
Yeah.
lot, making sure that we're honoring our boundaries and our capacity. And yeah, I'm just like grateful that I have now the capacity to support other people on their journeys.
Yeah, and you're doing it all differently. And I think that's the key is like even though you're returning to a similar,
Yeah.
job, it's you're
Mhm.
showing up as a whole new creation. Like you like barely resemble,
Yeah.
the Shanika who was in survival. You are so much more expansive. And so that's kind of the side effect of this journey is you make more space,
Mhm.
have more capacity. And, like you said, is you're showing up unapologetically.
Mhm.
I don't care if you're upset with this, like this is my boundary, and
Mhm.
there's so much power in that. And so you know, in the journey of chronic illness, we feel completely powerless. And so
Yeah.
part of this healing journey is so much about finding power again,
Mhm.
right? And actually being able to resource it and feel it.
Yeah.
And you said it's, you still have symptoms, whatever periodically. And I'll say that, every human being has stuff. I get that question all the time. Are you 100%? I'm like, there is no 100%. None. It just doesn't exist. We are healing until our final breaths. We're learning. We are growing until
Yeah.
we take our final breath. And that's not something to fear. It's something to be excited about. You said, I haven't arrived yet. I'm like, do we ever arrive? Right?
Right.
Like we're always just
Yeah.
showing up and continuously expanding. And this one definition of healing that David Kessler, who's a grief therapist, said once, I
Mhm.
stuck with it. He said that healing is when the trauma, and I'll add like the symptoms, the
Yeah.
diagnoses no longer control you. So
Yeah.
if I were to ask you, are you living your life like fully and abundantly? What
Mhm.
would you say?
Yeah. I would say yes.
That is healing right there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
no longer allowing the fear, the trauma to control you, meeting yourself where you're at, and continuously working to kind of notice what am I needing in this moment, right?
Yeah.
Even with myself. Like you said, if we, take on all of this too much too fast, or, I talk about grief too, right? When we're going through season of grief and losing my father, yeah, I felt stuff. Stuff will still come up, but it's not sickness. It's a
Right.
message. It's saying,
Yeah.
hey, like, can you
Yeah.
sit with me? Can you slow down? Can you hear me? And
Yeah.
now we have resources that we never would have had in the past, that our kids have, that our husbands have, that they're learning. And you're just doing such an amazing job of just sharing this with the community at large, and with your own family. And
Yeah.
it's like so remarkable. And I actually wanted to talk a little bit about relationships. And I don't know, maybe we even need to do another whole other episode on this. But maybe just,
We can we can touch on. I mean, because I think it's
yeah, let's do it.
important. Yeah, let's do it. I
Yeah,
think it is important.
it is because, our relationships really get challenged. Like they are challenged through this, right? There's a lack of intimacy. Your partner becomes your caregiver, very much like a parent in a way. I don't know if you noticed that, like George
Yeah,
felt like
yeah,
another parent. And yeah, it was just all of your roles, the way that you see each other, interact with each other, it all changes. And there's all of this stress child on. So, not all relationships survive this, and,
Right.
and we've seen that, but I mean, I know we've had this talk, right, about like
Yeah.
whether, there was a time where you were unsure about your relationship, and yet now, I see that you share that it's in like one of the best places it's been.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, share a little bit
Yeah.
about that because I think it's neat.
Yeah. Oof, man. Relationships to endure chronic illness is, man, it is, it's huge. Like I think that for us, it really, really, really challenged us because, like no one expects to, like when you say, when you have these vows, like, and this is in the context of marriage, right? But, some people could be not married, but and you say like in sickness and in health, like you really think in sickness and you think in if there's going to be sickness, not in sickness, in health and health, you think that sickness will come way down the
Yeah,
line,
when
right?
you're old and
And
yeah.
right, but when it happens, it's literally like this, it's like this new thing that comes into the relationship, and nobody know, like you don't know how to manage. And like you said, this person, like my husband became instantly the caregiver. Became the provider, the full
Yep.
provider. He, became kind of like mom and dad,
Yeah.
like literally. And so it is so hard, right? And relationships are already can be challenging. And you add this new stressor, it becomes so much harder. And for, my marriage in particular, initially I would say that we already had these patterns that were not that we hadn't fully worked through. Like we had been in therapy in the past, but I mostly identify with being more of an anxiously attached person, and he more of an avoidant attacher. And so, we find a lot of that dance between
Mm.
the anxious and the avoidant, right? And so we often got stuck in that pattern in our relationship. And so now you're adding this additional layer and we have to figure out how to adjust to it. It is super hard.
Oh yeah.
And so I think that, resentment was brewing for us because even though like my husband was available and he showed up and he tried to support me in the best way that he could, I don't think that he fully understood or knew how to do it. And so I wanted more from him. I wanted him to be more emotionally available than he had the capacity to do. And at the time, I interpreted it as, like he's not trying enough. And for him, I think he's like, what else do you want from me? Right? Like,
I heard those words exactly from my husband.
yes. What, like,
What
I mean,
else?
my husband even, there was a point where he said, I feel like you're like, I think he said something like, you're sucking the life out of me.
Yeah,
Right.
I
And
heard that too.
so hurtful to hear that because I'm like, but I'm not trying to, but like I'm literally like I don't feel well. I don't feel well all the time and I need you and then but also you need to show up for our family and it's so hard and I think we there was a point where I felt like we were just kind of coexisting and we like he was doing what he needed to do. He was there, but I didn't feel like we were connecting.
Yes.
And it was so hard because like I wanted the connection, but I couldn't meet him. He couldn't meet me. And we were just kind of like trying to make it work. And so I think there even came a point where I was like, I don't even know if we're gonna make it through this because um like we're not communicating in the way that we should. Every time we try to communicate, we're getting into these arguments. You're shut down. I'm emotional. And yeah, it was just really hard. And, like looking back, I'm like, I wish that I understood more about how to look at or how to get the support that, we would have needed, right? Because what I think I didn't understand was how much they are also impacted by what we're going through, right? Like, I think
Yes.
at the time I was thinking a lot about myself And I didn't really truly understand how much they were also going through. And especially, I think, if you think about men in particular, have a really hard time acknowledging or expressing their feelings in
Big
a
time.
way. And so a lot of times they'll either shut down or it'll come out in a way that is
Yeah.
just not healthy. And so like if I think if I had a little bit more understanding or compassion or knew like we're both in it, right? And so I think one of the biggest things I would tell couples is that like you are, if you think about the chronic illness, you're both in it. Like it's not just you, it's not just your stuff. Like it's us against this. Like if we are a team, we are here and we're going to tackle this together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's hard for some people to do that, right? Because, it's like if you're not the one that's experiencing the symptoms, it's really hard to understand what your partner is going through. And so, like, being able to help your partner to understand, like, this is what I'm experiencing, and really help them to see this is how horrible I feel. And being able to express like your needs from a place of like not blame, because I used to be like, well, you're not doing like you're
Yeah.
not blah blah
Same.
blah blah, all the things. And I wish that I would have been able at the time
Yeah.
to just like express myself and my needs in a way that would have been received very differently. But you know, hindsight is 2020.
Funny. Yeah.
But I think that so there, so all of that, I felt like we were just not connecting in a way that felt fulfilling anymore. And then there was just a point where I was like, like we have a daughter that's like looking at us, and not because of her, but I don't want, like, if we're gonna be together, I want us to be able to find a way to really understand each other. I want us to get back to a place where we feel connected.
Yeah.
And I really want us to work on understanding each other again. And so for us, what really helped us was couples coaching. We found an incredible couples coach. I talk so highly about her. And like it wasn't easy at first. Like those first few sessions were rough because like there was so much like resentment and hurt feelings and all that stuff that had built up. And so, once we started unpacking all of those things and learning like how to express ourselves and communicate and how to make time for each other, little by little, I think we started to feel more of that connection again. I know for me, there was a point where I was like, do I even feel that like,
Yeah.
do I even feel that spark? I don't, I'm just like, and it's funny because it's like, if we're not actively working on those things or the way that we're seeing our partners, it's really easy to believe that there's nothing left.
Yes.
Um, but I think that oftentimes what's really blinding us is the resentment and the hurt and the pain. And so, being able to work through all of those things really helped us a lot. And I feel like, we're still a work in progress, but definitely feel like we've come a long way. I feel like that's my guy. Like I asked
Yeah.
me like a year and a half ago, I'd be
I
like
don't know.
I don't know, but I really feel like yeah, I'm grateful for where we are today. I and that's the reason why I really felt really passionately about creating the workbook, because I
Yes.
know what a struggle it is.
Right here.
And yeah. And the thing that I included was like these really simple practices and connection activities
Yes.
that people can engage in, because it's like the little things that can create such a big impact for relationships. And so like in each chapter, like I included something that couples can do together so that it can create more connection. Even created some co-regulation practices as well. because I think healing is, as you just recently had your own workshop on healing as
Yes.
a family. And yes, it's a ripple effect. And when we can get families together to do the healing work, it really helps create such a more cohesive and loving and healthy environment.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
love that. And I would say like one of the biggest uh issues and challenges that couples face is this lack or loss of connection
Yeah.
and this belief that it can't come back. And like
Mhm.
you just shared, this beautiful testimony of like I didn't even have like the spark was gone and the connection was gone. And but yet those came back to life just like you came back to life. And
Yeah.
I remember you even, because we've had conversations like this, on our own in the past. And I remember you sharing something with me that was so profound. So first, we know that this journey changes us. We are never the same. We can't go back to who we are. She's that,
Mhm.
it just
Yeah.
doesn't happen, right? So it transforms us. And so when we have this expectation for a relationship to go back to exactly what it was, it's like we're trying to travel back in time when we can't, right? And so what I find is like there's a time to grieve that, to
Hmm.
say it's not going to be like
Yeah.
that anymore, right? And when we can
Yeah.
grieve that, we can actually see what is before us and accept of like, okay, this is where I'm at, right?
Hmm.
Grieving doesn't mean giving up,
Right.
right? It
Yeah.
just going through these motions of getting to this acceptance,
Hmm.
and then from that space being able to see what's there. And you were like, I think you had said something like, we're not, you can't go back to that, but you become something new. it's
Yeah.
it's the intention and this expectation of building something new together, and like
Right.
that's exciting,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with that. Like you'll never go back to that version of yourself or the relationship. How can you, right? Especially
Yeah.
both experiencing. I mean, there's so much even trauma within the chronic illness
Oh
is
yeah.
trauma.
Yes.
Right. And so even like, our partners like witnessing us and witnessing
Yes.
us going through all of that, like I remember my husband even saying like it was traumatic watching
Yeah.
you be that ill, right? And so even being able to acknowledge that in their experience of it is also important. So yeah, I think when we can grieve, it creates room for something new
It does.
and also I would say like there's some couples that you go through this and you realize that perhaps this is
Yeah.
just it's not the relationship for you. And for those couples, there's absolutely no shame in recognizing that this relationship is no longer one that is maybe serving you, or maybe, you both now are in different stages of your
Yeah.
life, or maybe you now like are on a new path and your partner isn't there. And so some couples don't make it, and that
Yeah.
is perfectly okay too.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's really, it can come up especially if it's a one-sided thing where it's like you
Yeah.
are growing,
Yeah.
you've done all this work, you're growing, you're working towards this,
Yeah.
and the other person doesn't grow with you, right? And
Hmm.
so we can see this disconnect of like, well, maybe we are on different paths, and it all comes down to like this, obviously these choices that we all have, right? You can stay and
Right.
work on it and try. And if that's not a possibility, you have choices. You always have choices. They're not always easy ones to
Right.
make. But just, sharing this with us as, because I think I wish this was around, a long time ago. I will say that. Um, I think it's going to be so supportive I
Yeah.
mean, I've recommended it to my clients already, but I
You.
think it'll be so supportive to, those of us who are going into this because it's written from this perspective as someone who's lived it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I know you touch on, some of that in here as well, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not our
Yeah.
fault that we're not feeling well. And like, there's
Yeah.
this this just awareness,
Yeah.
this beautiful
Yeah.
awareness. And yeah, I mean, I like I said, I'm really
Yeah.
excited to
Yeah.
go through
Yeah.
this and
I
tell
have a whole
you,
chapter on chronic illness, like just
yes,
on chronic illness. So yeah, just kind of allowing both voices, the voice of the person who is chronically ill or recovering, and then the voice of, the caregiver or the person that
Yeah.
is supporting that person.
Yeah. So do yourself a favor, go and get that book. And Shanika has so much to offer, and we're gonna put some links below so you know how to reach her. But I wanted to ask, one last thing really. What advice would you
Mhm.
give to someone who's on this journey to give them a hope rope? Like if you could share with them anything, someone who's feeling discouraged, hopeless, where you were,
Yeah. Yeah.
what would you share? Is there a message? And I know you probably know so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, what message of hope would you leave them with?
I would say that the biggest message would be to find people, to connect to people who have walked this path before,
Mhm.
and grab onto any, like, even if it's like a smidge of hope, just like use their stories as evidence that healing is possible. That, like, if it's possible for them, then maybe it's possible for me. And even though we have a negativity bias that's like,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm
It's
different.
strong.
Like,
Yep.
when I say we've all had the thought, like, there's no way I'm different. And yes, you are different. But when we're choosing to show up and do this work, changes will happen. It might take longer than you would want. For some people, it happens a lot quicker. But just know that if you just keep showing up, you keep at it, you keep trusting in the process, that it will shift. And really, I say, connect with people, also community, right? And so I love that, you have your Haven membership, which is absolutely fantastic,
Oh, thank
because
you.
I think that it offers this beautiful community of people who get to not only learn from you, and I love that you have both the grief portion and the, nervous system regulation and the brain rewiring piece together, because I don't know that there's any other programs that have both of the resources that have both of those combined. And I just think that that's so important, because I think a big piece of this journey is about grief.
Yes.
And so if you can connect with community of some sort, do that, because it makes the biggest difference to have people who are also on the same path, people that may be a little further along, that you can take from their own hope,
Yeah.
and also, like, literally celebrate all the little wins.
Yes.
Remember,
Yes.
those were things that you used to say, like, that's a win, right? And sometimes we take those little wins for granted, but they all matter. And every time we take a moment and celebrate those little wins, it is doing something. It is literally sending a message that, hey, something's happening, a shift is happening. And we want to give our brain and our body that input, that every time something happens, that is just evidence that I'm
Yes.
healing, right? So, like, really
Yes.
look at those little minor wins, or even the big ones. Like, that's evidence that some shifts are happening and that I'm healing. And I really think that those are those small and not so small things that really impact our capacity, and it really helps our healing.
Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, you've come so far. And I know you're going to go even further, but just I think your story is such a hope rope for so many. And I just want to thank you again. And as a side note, speaking of community, Shanika also runs a reparenting group, right? That
Yeah,
meets monthly. And
monthly, yeah.
yeah, and you're also part of the chronic PTSD community as well, right? So so many communities, and we can pop those links below as well if you're feeling like you need some more support and connection on your journey. So, Shenikka, it was so good to have you on. I can't wait for everyone to listen to this.
Thank you. Really appreciate you. And thank you for having me as a guest.